In part 5 of our build guide, we strip the interior of the donor and pull out the dash. You will be spending quite a lot of time inside of your donor, so it is a good idea to clean and vacuum the interior before you start. Be careful of shards of glass as you take out the large bits of trash. Use a vacuum for the small debris. We will start stripping the interior by removing the center console. Remove the parking brake cover by prying up the rear with a screwdriver. Then pry up the rear molded cup holder. Next, lift the rear of the shifter cover just enough to get to the rear accessory plug underneath. Disconnect the rear accessory plug. Now lift the cover over the shifter and turn it upside down to access the front accessory plug. Disconnect the front accessory plug and remove the panel from the donor. Pull the front tunnel cover off of the passenger side. This cover has a schematic of the BCM on it, so you'll want to save it. Remove the driver's side cover. Use a 7mm socket to remove the plastic frames from the passenger and driver's sides. Use the 7mm socket again to remove the 4 screws that hold the main tunnel cover. Disconnect the 2 BCM plugs by first squeezing just ahead of the gray lever and then flipping the lever. Use a 7mm socket to disconnect the red multi-plug. Remove the 3 BCM screws using a 7mm socket. Turn over the BCM and remove the gray multi-plug using the same 7mm socket. Use a screwdriver to pry the cable end off of the shifter post. Remove the U-shaped retainer and then press the tabs in to disconnect the cable from the shifter housing. Unplug the wires that go to the shifter. Use a 13mm socket to remove the 4 nuts holding the shifter to the tunnel. Pull the levers located inside the trunk to allow the seat backs to fold down. Use a screwdriver to release the retaining clips located at the outer pivots of the seat backs. Pull up on the rear of the bottom seat cushion to free it from under the black seat rail. With the rear angled up, push the front of the seat backwards to release it. Remove the lower plastic door trim. Remove the large rubber door seal. Use a good quality T50 torque socket to remove the seatbelt bolts. You may need to use a cheater pipe or a breakover bar to loosen them. Make sure you keep the socket as straight as possible. Uneven pressure can break the teeth off of your socket. Use a screwdriver to remove the cover to gain access to the upper bolts. Use a knife or a small screwdriver to open the covers at the top of each pillar. Use a 7mm socket to remove the screws that hold the A-pillar covers on. Remove the A-pillar covers by pulling the top out and then up toward the roof. If the rear cover has a screw, remove it using a 7mm socket and then pull the cover free. Some models have a plastic cable holding the cover. Use wire cutters to cut this cable. Use a 7mm socket to remove the bolt at the top of the cover and then remove the cover. Then remove the lower cover. Repeat this process on the other side of the donor. Use a pry bar to remove the steel seatbelt guide. The seatbelt connector can be disconnected using a knife or a thin screwdriver. You will need to use the T50 torque socket again to loosen the bolt holding the seatbelt mechanism. Remove the carpet from the donor. Be careful of any shards of glass or sharp debris that might have been missed by the vacuum cleaner earlier. Pry the upper dash cover up just enough to access the light sensor. Disconnect the sensor from the cover by turning it counterclockwise. Using a deep 10mm socket, remove the two bolts located on either side of the center defroster vent. The bolts at the base of each A-pillar are hard to get to. Start with a 3/8 drive 13mm socket. When the head of the ratchet touches the A-pillar, swap to a 1/4" drive 13mm socket. Use a screwdriver to pry the cover off of the end of the dash. Disconnect the yellow airbag plug by pulling the safety lock and pushing on the clip with a screwdriver. Pull out and disconnect the black multi-plug. Do the same with the antenna wire. Stuff both back into the dash. Use a 13mm socket to remove the two bolts from the dash. Use a 10mm socket to remove the bolt at the bottom corner of the dash. Repeat this process on the other side of the dash. Remove the plastic knee panel located below the steering assembly. Use a knife or a small screwdriver to disconnect the trunk release connector. Pull out the main dash multi-plug and disconnect it by squeezing the black tabs and then flipping the white handle over. Use wire cutters to free the multi-plug wiring from the dash. Use a 10mm socket to remove the center dash support. There is one on each side of the tunnel. Use zip ties to keep the BCM plugs up and out of the way. Use a 13mm socket to remove the nut in the center of the AC lines. Remove the upper AC line and bend the lower AC line out of the way. Pry the fuel line off the dash firewall and move it out of the way. Move the evap line out of the way. Pry the brake line free from the dash firewall and push it down. Use pliers to remove the brake booster vacuum line. Use a 13mm wrench to remove the brake lines from the master cylinder. Remove the master cylinder using a 13mm socket. Place the self-locking nuts back on the booster for later use. Pry the power steering wire off of the firewall. Remove the 7 firewall nuts using a 10mm socket. Pry the dash firewall away from the body firewall. Push the collapsible steering shaft out of the way. With one person supporting the dash on each side, pull the dash back and lower it down. Remove the dash from the driver's side of the donor. In the next video, we'll remove the main wiring harness from the donor and strip the dash.